Good morning. It is Saturday, 19th of June. I'm back in the reading nook with a nice hot cup of tea. And of course, parcels to unbox. And the next one I'm going to unbox is this one, which arrived in the post this morning. So it is from today's post. I don't know what it is. So it will be as much a surprise to me as it is to you. There we go. There we go. Bedlam Hall, a depressing role-playing about a game about horrible people. Yes, okay. The family is strange, the house is cursed, the weather is dreadful. Welcome to Bedlam Hall, the macabre role-playing game from Monkeyfun Studios. Can you manage to survive the strange happening and the family's bizarre behaviour while still keeping the house under control and your references in order? Play to find out, but don't count on it. So first off, I'm going to thank Sue Savage for recommending this. I had the pleasure of gaming with Sue Savage, and on a number of occasions she runs a great liminal game, and we played in a fantastic or very enjoyable campaign of Mutiny Zero recently, which one day I hope we do go back to. But this is a role-playing game in which you play the household servants of Bedlam Hall, and the idea is essentially you'll find upstanding members of the lower orders who live and work downstairs, but obviously you've got to go upstairs to attend to the masters and mistresses of the house and family, and unfortunately they're weird and odd and strange, and you have to cope. And it actually says, a foreboding introduction in the foyer. Playing Bedlam Hall is a terrible decision. There is so little joy and light to this entire experience, you may want to reconsider your options of how you prefer to pass the time. Clearing out that closet you've been meaning to get around to, or perhaps catching up on the household finances. Even just spending the next couple of minutes contemplating the poor decisions you've made in the past, regretting your foolish behaviour, and wondering if you'll ever learn your lesson with secretly knowing your perpetual recidivism is a foregone conclusion. These sort of options are probably better uses of your time instead of diving into the dark and miserable world of the Blackwood family and their servants. And yet you're still reading. Again, another poor decision you'll regret later. You can't say you weren't properly warned. Bedlam Hall takes place after the Great War, set in the English countryside at one of the remaining estate homes owned by the British upper class. A more pleasure experience would be playing a member of that genteel aristocracy, enjoying the light-hearted frivolity that accompanies the well-to-do, with the greatest of impending crises involving who will be wearing what at the next upcoming soiree. That would be a nice game. Good luck finding that. Instead, you and your players will be joining the household staff, tasked with maintaining the estate and performing the expected duties of your position while serving the Blackwood family. It's dreary, back-breaking work, filled with unpleasant chores, meaningless customs and overcomplicated procedures that result in a lifetime of sadness and lower back pain. Contemplate that slow ache in your knees you felt this morning. That really will be the entire experience ahead of you. In a modern day, it's difficult to imagine the lack of self-sufficiency among the upper class at the time. However, it's not uncommon for the aristocracy to use hired help for assistance in even the most mundane of activities. In the case of the Blackwood Star family, there's always to be a vacant position among the staff at any given time. The Blackwoods do seem to go through a lot of hired help, who often leave under mysterious, or shall we say, gruesome circumstances. But your experience will probably be different, because you're special. Of course you are. So, essentially, this is essentially Downton Abbey with degenerates. Upstairs, downstairs, basically where you're all downstairs staff dealing with the monsters that are the upstairs staff. I'm saying there are staff, but upstairs members. So, you're basically the basic members of the family are vile and horrid, and will ask you to do weird things, and things best left to, you know, to the unnatural, and sometimes you've got to do them or get someone else to do them in order to retain your position. And of course, at the end of the day, if things go belly up and the police turn up, or let me see, basically the family has to pay inheritance tax and has to sell up, then you need your references, and you better be on the good side of the upstairs family. And this essentially is a parody, essentially, of sort of really what did happen during the 1920s, 30s, after the Great War, when basically the families were rent apart by the effects of the Great War. So many, you know, members of the aristocracy dying in the war. And you will see this, essentially, it's a story that is told in Downton Abbey, because essentially, when I bring up the subject of Downton Abbey, essentially, that's something that we all kind of get the references to. Okay, if you don't know particularly about the history of the period, or understand what was going on, I mean, I'm a history buff, so I sort of know a bit about the period, whether that's through academic study or basically just not basically watching and reading about history. So what we've got basically, I should basically show you some background. So you've got the chauffeur, and he's getting rid of something. So yeah, it gets off to a bad start there. Essentially, for the beleaguered staff of Bedlam Hall, nicknamed Bedlam Hall by the servants, life is a continual battle of cruel one-upmanship in order to gain favour among the family, in pursuit of prestige, the gauge of respectability, and more importantly, the cornerstone to advancement in one's abilities. Those with higher prestige are looked upon as more important figures of authority to the family, heavily relied upon, and usually favoured more than others, whether it's deserved or not. So, unlike a traditional role-playing game, this is adversarial. You are competing against your rivals. So here's the basic picture of the family at breakfast, and there is just something wrong with that. Essentially, I'm going to go, that kedgeree is haunted. That's my suggestion. And if you're wondering what kedgeree is, it's smoked fish, rice, and with sort of curry powder. And very nice it is too. I do thoroughly recommend it, and not just for breakfast. Essentially, you will play through. You will use your prestige to advance your position at the expense of others, suffer trauma, and there are multiple trauma tables in here, so degrees of trauma. Trauma in its many horrible forms. Mr. Moorcock, the butler, needs to retrieve the tea tray from the drawing room, despite hearing a rather loud argument occurring through the closed door. Bracing himself, he attempts to ignore the strange as he enters the room. Rolling etiquette, he gets 5, a failure. He picks up the tray, carefully to avoid eye contact between the screaming Blackwoods. He fails to notice Lady Blackwood pick up a crystal decanter from the bar set and throw it at her husband. Though Aldecott easily dodges the decanter, Mr. Moorcock unfortunately does not. The decanter smashes against the back of his head, causing one trauma and a nasty headache. And that's probably just one of the mildest of traumatic events in Bedlam Hall. And there's traumatic repercussions and an inevitable downward spiral. So we're thinking essentially suffering trauma, working for the family, as sort of the sanity spiral that you would get in Call of Cthulhu and Encounter Monsters of the Mythos. Working for a family like the Blackwoods wears you down. And you can recover, remove trauma, but as I say, the pointless task of removing trauma. And then of course we go on to how to play. You know, what is this? All this role-playing codswallop. Anyway, that's a lovely word, codswallop. And you have essentially a series of different moves you can make. The mechanics is essentially you roll 2 dice, 2 6-sided dice, you roll 10 or above. It's a full success, jolly well done. 7 to 9, it's a partial success, so a yes but, and 6 and below, it's a failure. So you are looking at a powered by the apocalypse game. And there's plenty of examples, and every character type has a definition of different moves. So there are basic moves, character moves, cruel moves, and custom moves. I love the idea of cruel moves. Just, you know, basically, in the game that is. And there are the family has secrets, some of which you know about, some of which you won't, and you'll essentially you will expose them as they go along. And essentially the response of the family will either be well, best better keep Smith the butler around because he knows my secrets, or Smith the butler knows too much. Time for him to retire, I think. And whether that is retire or retire. And yes, so you have roles like positions and duties. So you have the butler, the chauffeur, the cook, the housekeeper, the maid, and the valet. And you have essentially moves, and you have moves and suggested names and behaviours and so on, and appearances. So let's have a look at the butler. Butler says, "Sir, although I understand the sarcophagus comes from a rare archaeological dig, are you quite certain there should be shrieking coming from inside?" Suggested names: Algernon, Merriman, Stevens, Pritchard, Carson. Behaviour: demanding, snooty, tired, humorous, secretive, steadfast. Or appearance: ancient, broad shoulders, pristine, voluminous, gnarled, sinister. And you get voice of authority, you get extra prestige. And you have moves like stiff upper lip. When attempting to ignore the strange, you may roll fortitude instead of your composure. Family favourite: you practically raise one of the household, fully aware of their personal issues and love them regardless. You can ignore any trauma from their actions. Employment statement: successfully using innuendo against another member of staff, you have the option to cause additional trauma. Or it wouldn't be proper. When attempting to guide the direction of the family, you may roll etiquette instead of your persuasion. Keys to the manor: due to your social position, no room is unavailable to you in the entirety of the house. You have the ability to open up any locked door and enter any room via secret entrances. Because essentially, if you essentially the staff would be trusted with certain keys and the ability to move around the family's rooms unobserved, as long as they didn't cross certain boundaries or expose any secrets. And there will be passages behind the family rooms where the staff could move unobserved if necessary. So yes, you have the butler and the chauffeur. Driving the country, my lady? Certainly, let me fetch your trunk. Will your husband be joining us in today's travel? Oh, in the trunk. Very good, my lady. So yes, things like that. You have to do the same for the cook. Fetch me the potatoes from the cellar and be quick about it. And don't turn your back on anything you see bad down there, whatever you think it is. The housekeeper: it's no different than breaking the neck of a chicken, young lady. You were doing the poor lad a favour, and haven't got all day. The lady dowager has very specific requests for her afternoon tea. Yeah. And the maid: yes, my lady, I understand there should be no trace of the Duke's body in the bedroom. Allow me to fetch a damp cloth. And the valet: if I may suggest, my lord, one should always consider wearing more comfortable trousers if there's an expectation there might be a late night digging required to retrieve certain items. And then there's the gardener. We need to go talk to Mr. Cuthwatch. Someone was attacked in the topiary. Do we have to, sir? I don't really care for how the topiary stares at me. So you get the tone of the game freely from these basically character types. So yeah. So essentially we're talking so we're going to the dreadful decor, sexuality and society norms of the day, talking about essentially the mores of the period, good English weather, a contradiction in terms. So there's nothing like a bright, pleasant day in the countryside surrounding Bedlam Hall. Oh yeah, and the weather is always the top of the conversation in an English role-playing game like this. Unusual names for people, something's cooking, something's bad. there's so much flavour there in capturing sort of the feel of that of the period, you know, even if it is a parody of it. So yeah. And then we have Rube Goldberg variations. So basically, Bedlam Hall was based upon an English manor. The mistress of the house, i.e. the referee, can transfer it to other settings. So essentially, were you being served? Mr. Suffering's department store, based upon a certain well-known sitcom of the 70s. True Bedlam, essentially music to a psychiatric institution. Ship of Fools, essentially Welcome Aboard the HMS Gigantic. Essentially that's very Carry On. And then we go on to the house itself, and what's in each location, navigating the house, and just some of the weird things you're going to see in the house. Many portraits, because of course the family has ancestors going back hundreds of years, and they've all got the portraits and they're all on the walls. So you've got a guide to the house in here, and you can actually build elements of the house during play. And in some ways, there's another similar role-playing game by Graham Walmsley called Anatomy of a Murder, which does essentially a classic cosy country house murder a la Agatha Christie in 2 acts. In that, essentially, I'm going off topic here, apologies, but essentially you start off play with playing members of the household and establishing their relationships and the holders of each other, and at the end of the first act one character dies, and then they return in the next act as the detective, and they have to uncover who murdered their character. So it's sort of similar to that, but again in this it focuses upon the relationships between upstairs and downstairs. And there's a useless guide for the master of the house, basically how to run the game. So lots of things, guides. So essentially, we have things like here we go. The obligatory section about players who just have to punch things, and violence towards the family is always a bad idea, unless it isn't. So this is essentially, it's a storytelling game, so it's not a game in which violence is a necessity. It's certainly not against your employers, but again you have lots of advice in here, like the beginning of the end of your first session, basically how to run the game. And then creating troubles for the family, troubles for the house, and then it's sort of like the end of the beginning, your second session. So it takes multiple sessions to sort of set up and play. It's not a sort of like, okay, we'll set everything up and then we'll play. It's taking it in steps. And yeah, lots of interesting things in here, and we have examples of play. So we have a Simply Dreadful birthday party. Oh, I'm all in favour of Simply Dreadful birthday parties. We do members of the guests of the household, complete list there. So you basically you've got ready to play elements there as well if you want to, rather than create your own. And a guide to household standards or lack thereof. Essentially, we're talking about essentially the members of the household are here. They are in all their glory in basically either one of those newfangled photographs or a family portrait, and with descriptions of who they are. And there's the member of the family we won't talk about for not obvious reasons, because it's not obvious there's anything wrong here. And we've got basically the last of it. We have a horrible compendium of moves, basically an index of all the moves you can do, and examples of how they work as well. So there we go. So for example, essentially a move might be behind the scenes assistant, gain prestige when you successfully protect someone secret from being revealed. For example, Mr. Fizzlewig is aware that Mrs. Gooch is secretly maintaining an affair with Silas Moodley, owner of the Haunch and Pillock Tavern in town. Before heading into town for a special visit, Mrs. Gooch accidentally drops a pair of silk bloomies in front of the other service staff. Before anyone asks, Mr. Fizzlewig grabs the pair and thanks Mrs. Gooch for mending his clothing, modelling them against his waist. Slightly confused but not really surprised, the rest of the staff go about their duties as Mrs. Gooch nods a solemn debt of gratitude towards Mrs. Fizzlewig's actions. I wasn't expecting that. So, lots of examples here play through. So essentially, this is a really nicely developed, fully rounded out game. We've got a list of the Kickstarter backers at the back, but you've also got suggested inspirations. And top of the list is Downton Abbey. We've got others here like The Addams Family, Dark Shadows, Upstairs Downstairs, Gosford Park, Jeeves and Worcester, An Unfortunate Series of Events, and a favourite of mine, Ostrich and Old Lace, essentially, which is a classic farce, which I thoroughly recommend. So yeah, that is Bedlam Hall, a role-play game of keeping the family together despite the fact that they are not your family. So thank you very much for watching another unboxing in the Nook. If you've enjoyed this, please do click the like button down below. If you've got any comment, feedback, I welcome those, and I appreciate you taking the time to post those, and I will respond as well. And if you want to be alerted to yet another unboxing in the Nook and another video of me sat out here with parcel, book to talk about, nice cup of tea, then please do hit the subscribe button down below, and you'll get all that and me talking about a book I've probably never heard of, or for 10 minutes, and my first impressions, because again, I've not seen this before, I've only heard about it, and I'm just basically picking up things that I see just from a peruse through its pages. That's what you're going to get with an unboxing in the Nook. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching another unboxing in the Nook. If you've enjoyed this, again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and I'll be back again in the near future. Bye for now.